Hello and welcome to this webinar. I think we are now on time and we can start right now. I'd like to give you a quick overview of what you can expect from the next couple of minutes. I will start with a short introduction and make a quick overview over PoolParty Semantic Suite. It's a release webinar, so some of you are already familiar with the software and rather curious about the new features. Still, I would like to take the opportunity to make a short introduction to the software in general to those who got in touch with PoolParty the first time. So it's about PoolParty 6. It's a release webinar. It's one of the two major releases we issue per year. My name is Andreas Blumauer. I'm the founder and CEO of the Semantic Web company. The company itself got founded back in 2004, and it's the developer and vendor of PoolParty. And the current version of this software suite is currently 6.0. So that's already a quick introduction into what it's all about. It's about knowledge graphs. It's about making the links between the business objects available, linking several aspects of a certain domain, probably to some background knowledge like the World Wide Web Consortium is the standardization body of the semantic web. And one of those standards, the SCOS standard, is something the PoolParty Semantic Suite has implemented in its core. It's good for taxonomy management, which again is just part of a larger knowledge graph usually, which then can be linked maybe to other external sources even. And we will talk about that in the next couple of minutes also. I will show you how PoolParty 6.0 now has more or less developed into the most complete semantic middleware on the market. And that was also the goal of this release 6.0. And I will give you a couple of live demos. I will show you a couple of end user applications even. And I will also introduce you to the new features of this software. A couple of organizational things. The webinar will last around 50 minutes. And at the end, I'd like to open up the microphones of those people who would like to stay in the room so we can discuss questions maybe together in real time. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please post it into the panel you have in this GoToWebinar software. There you also find some downloads. So there are 3 downloads available. One is the handout, the slide deck of the presentation I will give to you. So very quickly, the company itself, we're based in Vienna in Austria. It's a privately held company. We have 40 plus employees working in the areas of text mining and linked data. Since the topic of the semantic web had a quite tremendous increase of interest in the last couple of years, we also benefit from a bit of a revenue growth every year. And the company itself also is very much in the area of research projects still. 20% of our activities are dedicated to research, and the outcome there will mainly transferred into the product. So again, what I will show you with the 6.0 version, a couple of things like word sense, induction, is based on algorithms which were developed in the course of our research projects, which are mainly funded by the European Union. So here you see a couple of those topics we are mainly interested in, and all together builds the basis for the software, for the PoolParty software. So the suite itself was released the first time in 2009. The current version 6.0 indicates a major release. That's probably a little bit confusing. You might ask yourself, okay, there are 8 years in between and just 6.0. The reason for that is that major releases we didn't release as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 number in a row, but rather like the last major release was 5.7. But from now on, we have switched into this mechanism that any new major release will also have a new number in the first position. So there might be a 6.1, 6.2, and so on in the next couple of months. But the next major release will be out end of this year, and that will be 7.0. So the software is very much W3C standards compliant. I already mentioned that. It can be installed on premises. It can be used as a cloud service. And we are very proud of being named by KM World as one of the trend-setting products in the last 2 years. Couple of customer references just to show you the scope and the range of which industries we're working with. So it's from banks to pharmaceutical companies, publishers, entertainment, NGOs, actually any organization which deals with a lot of heterogeneous data sources, which looks into solutions that could help them to get better tools at hand to find information more precisely and link little chunks of information in a highly automated way. So that's the basic idea of linked data and the semantic web in general. So if you want to say it in one sentence, it's really about bringing together the unstructured and the structured information available in your organization together with sources from the outside. So that's a quick overview of what PoolParty can do for you. There are several sets of functionalities and components. On the left-hand side, you see the taxonomy and ontology server. It builds the basis to create knowledge models, which later then also can be used for entity extraction services and text mining. The text mining itself can be used to find out the gaps between a reference corpus and the knowledge model. So that's indicated by this arrow back. So it's kind of a learning system in that sense. And on the right-hand side, you see in the core the PoolParty Unified Views component, which can orchestrate several ingestion mechanisms. So you can define pipelines to get data from unstructured repositories to highly structured ones. Here, ontologies might play an important role to do schema mapping, bring that all together into one RDF data model, so to speak. Entity linking is something which can be integrated here. So that means any unstructured and of course also semi and structured data can be transformed into RDF using the entities from your knowledge graph. And if that's all put together into a RDF graph database, then you can put on top really interesting analytics and search facilities. And that's basically what the PoolParty Semantic Suite can do for you. So most of the components can be accessed via API. So there's a RESTful API for most of the methods. And as another standard of the World Wide Web Consortium, you can access your consolidated and integrated data through a Sparkle engine. And Sparkle, the query language for RDF graphs, is something you can really make use of when it comes to data analytics. So another perspective on the system would be from a rather maybe roles, different roles, which roles are integrate or involved in the system. So first of all, here are people working on the knowledge graphs. You would start probably with taxonomies. You can reuse existing taxonomies, import Excel sheets maybe, extract taxonomies from classification systems or already existing databases. And some of the work might be done manually, and other stuff will come from the Corpus learning module, which extends the existing taxonomy semi-automatically. So this is the place where the knowledge graphs are developed and provided to the other systems. So here already APIs can be used. So for instance, the developer can access the thesauri and ontologies through a RESTful API. The extract on top, that's derived from the knowledge model. So all the logics behind which names are used for which things, how are they related, in which hierarchies are they put and stuff. That's all more or less encoded in the semantic knowledge model. And the actual extraction then is done in a certain service, in an application which is also installed on the server. And that can be then be forwarded or provided to the content manager, where the actual tagging could be done either fully automatically, so that could be done here, or the content manager could still create the suggestions of the engine. And it's not just used, as I've showed you before, for typically unstructured information like PDFs or content in general. The same mechanism could also be integrated in a workflow where rather semi-structured data is generated. I will give you a live example based on a tool called Font2XML. So that's a web-based XML editor. And here you will see how you can link the content workflow to underlying knowledge model, and the system will help you to create not only structured content, but semantic content from scratch. So from the very beginning, you enrich your actual content with the entities you have defined in your knowledge graph, and which you make available as a control vocabulary. So that was a really quick introduction to PoolParty on a very general level. And now I hope it's getting also more interesting to the people in the audience who already know PoolParty to a certain degree. And I will introduce you to the new features PoolParty 6.0 now is offering. By the way, just yesterday, my two colleagues, Helmut and Robert, did another webinar that was a rather technical deep dive. So we will make the recordings and the slides available to you, and you can find them in our channels. So this webinar is really more from the user perspective. Nevertheless, I will probably from time to time also talk a little bit more technical. So the first feature I'd like to mention is the Semantic Middleware Configurator. Since we're talking about link data, it's important to be able to link to different sources. I mean, that's an obvious feature of a semantic middleware platform. Nevertheless, already when the graphs are created, you would like to do mappings and links to other sources like DPpedia and so on. We provided that feature already in earlier releases, but there was never such a place where you can manage and maintain all the connectors to other sources, other systems. You know, with PoolParty, you can, for instance, configure where your Corpus learning module should be running in which triple store, and maybe you have not just one triple store in your environment, so maybe you have several ones. With PoolParty, you always have at least one triple store installed. That's by default RDF4J. And if you want, you can connect to other semantic web compliant triple stores. So currently we are supporting CraftDB, MarkLogic, Stardock, and Virtuoso on top of RDF4J. This list might be extended in the next couple of months, but nevertheless, those are our preferred partners, and those systems are supported. And in the semantic middleware configuration, you can now manage the triple stores. You can manage which indices should be used, for instance, for the extraction service. So also for the graph search, we can provide out-of-the-box connectors to Elasticsearch and Solar. And there are also other options to link your data to third-party applications, like for when you want to do some visualizations of your ontologies or of your taxonomies. And that now can also be nicely attached to third-party services. I will show you an example how you can make your ontologies you've created with PoolParty, how you can visualize them with a third-party tool like WebVowl. That would be one of the configuration options. And then, of course, it's not just about the triple stores and the actual system you are embedded in. It's also about the data your taxonomies and ontologies are embedded in. And you can configure several linked open data sources or linked data sources in general. It's not necessarily just open data. And here we have extended the list of available resources you can use out of the box. So there's, for instance, with DBpedia, we added Dutch and Russian version on top of the already existing ones like English, French, Spanish, and German. Then we still have, of course, geonames available. Then we added Getty as an additional linked data source, Getty vocabularies. You can now link your taxonomies to, and also Perm ID. That's a Thomson Reuters service based on RDF technologies, which is interesting to gather information around companies, organizations, mainly for the financial services industry. And then there are a couple of other features in PoolParty you can now nicely configure based on this configurator. I might log in now to the system and show you a little bit around. So that's the current version, 6.0. So that's 6.01. And here are the options you can configure in the Semantic Middleware configurator. The triple stores. So you see here, for instance, there is a connector configured to Virtuoso, to MarkLogic. If you click here, you see how that's configured. You also get a signal if something went wrong with your configuration. So that's just an example here. You can nicely configure a new one if you want to attach to maybe to a Stardock server here. Then here you can configure the indices being used for several reasons. The external systems like WebVowl, you can configure here. So that's a quite interesting option. You can explain to the systems what parts of your graph you would like to visualize, how the data transfer should take place. Is it just a file download, or if the third-party service like WebVowl, which can use, for instance, a turtle file available on the web as an input parameter, then you can configure that right here, and that would be the URL you have to call to visualize the ontology, for instance. So you can configure here your own new visualizations. If you have another visualization service somewhere up and running, you could do it here. And here are all the LOD sources I mentioned before, for instance, Perm ID. So that's the Perm ID service or the Getty service. So that's all available now in this one and single dashboard where you can control your link data environment. The next nice feature, I guess, for PoolParty users is the usage of text corpora, reference text corpora. We extended that feature to a large degree in this release. So from all the users from 5.7 already have known, or most of the 5.7 users have known that feature. It had a couple of limits. Of course, it still has, but the limits, we pushed the limits beyond certain boundaries. You can now calculate the reference model on really large corpora, and we also included a kind of a common language model under the hood as well. So it's a kind of a combination of a domain-specific statistical language model and a common language model for a given language. And on top of that, the extractor, of course, does the relevancy ranking by using single documents and most of all by using the knowledge graphs being created beforehand. And one of the other options, which were based upon the text reference text corpus, was always the feature that you can create new candidate concepts from terms, from free terms. And that workflow was also improved quite a lot. The overall performance and stability was again improved. And of course, now with the Semantic Middleware configurator, you can also define in which of the triple stores you have deployed in your environment you would like to run the reference corpus analysis. You could split it apart even and say, okay, this one I'd like to run in my RDF for J, it's not that big, and the other one maybe, which is a really large text corpus, I'd like to run in the meantime somewhere else in a cluster, for instance, I've attached to the environment. So maybe let's take a look on that. I just open a sample project. It's about classification of journal papers in the area of computing in general. So therefore, we are using, just for this demo purpose here, the ACM computing classification system. It's a quite elaborated taxonomy in the area of computing or computer science in general. And as a reference corpus, I calculated first here in this local triple store, that's an RDF for J. And a second calculation I did in a virtuoso in that concrete case. And you also will, that's by the way displayed here. So you see also when that was calculated, of course. And very important is the statistics around that. And you see several options down here. And the word sense induction, for instance, is a new one that wasn't in place with the last major release. That's a new feature I will explain in a minute. And also the language model scores is something you can derive from here. So that's the language model, the common language model. And you can think of kind of on top of that, it's kind of a domain-specific language model you can calculate. So what's here? Just to bring that back to your memory. First of all, the concepts are calculated, the concepts from the knowledge graph. So what's found in these reference documents most frequently? Semantics, ontology. So those are in this, at least that document collection, the most frequently found concepts. You also see which of the preferred or which labels are most frequently found. That's a good indicator if you're whether your taxonomy is in a good shape or not. Here also you can see concepts from the taxonomy which were not found in the reference corpus. Also an interesting indicator if you have to extend or change the structure of your taxonomy. And then the extracted terms are interesting to be used for further extension of your taxonomy. And here, a couple of things were improved and added totally new. So you see here, since that's operated in RDF4J, performance already is a little bit at its limits. So you see the extracted terms still loading. Sometimes that also has to do with that the caches have to warm up a little bit, and then later it will run a little bit smoother. So here you get the suggestions, and here we have several new algorithms implemented to detect the really most important free terms, which should be integrated into the knowledge graph. So the precision improved a lot. And what also is interesting, now you can click here and the system is going to load documents from the reference corpus, which helps you to identify the terms even more precisely. So you will understand, you get a context for the suggestions. You can read through those and then decide whether you want to introduce this new term or not. And here, also interesting, you have this word senses. If you click here, the system will come up with two kind of interpretations how RDF could be used. So is it an ambiguous term? That's the question. And here the system also suggests, okay, RDF is frequently used in the context of OWL and description logics. And a different meaning could be that RDF is used rather in the area of blank notes. If you feel like, no, that's the same thing, you don't have to do anything, in that status, actually the term RDF is interpreted as it were one thing, but you can also split it up if you like. So you can add those as single concepts, or if you have more than just two, you can merge those here in this dialog and make them this merged terms available as one concept. So again, you remember probably if you've worked with that before, you can now put that into this candidate concept box with a double click still. And that's what I did here with RDF. And what you see here is a little bit of rebrushed interface. You can now see the terms, which are frequently used together with RDF. That could be interesting maybe to detect even more candidate concepts. For instance, W3C maybe. You can double click here, then you see how W3C is interpreted. You see quickly, okay, that's obviously somehow related to the World Wide Web Consortium. Yes, it is, because it's an alternative label. So you can put that together. You can also link, for instance, RDF with W3C and so on. So you can integrate more and more terms. You can link those in that interface. You can make terms available as alternative labels to the concepts. And if you have a green signal on the right-hand side, then you will be able to integrate that into your existing taxonomy. And that's always the case if you have at least one broader concept defined. You know, we don't want to allow orphan concepts to be in the knowledge graph, because that wouldn't make any sense in the semantic web. What we also will see is the reference text corpus plays a very important role when it comes to shadow concept extraction. That's a totally new feature in 6.0. The shadow concept extraction benefits a lot from text corpora, which are really representative. And for those who will work with large text corpora, you will see that the performance and the time that these models are calculated in the background that was really improved. So one of the largest corpora, which ended up with around about 100 million term occurrences based on 5,000 journal papers, wouldn't take much longer than 5 hours on a single node server. So you can really calculate in a reasonable amount of time a highly expressive statistical model around your semantic model, which then will be used together for entity extraction and word sense disambiguation and all those things, also shadow concept extraction and so on. So just to make sure, give you a picture at hand how that works. So the blue parts are the ones you more or less have curated in your taxonomy and where the quality has been approved. So that's kind of the part of the knowledge where you would say, okay, that's for sure the correct relation and the correct synonyms and anything like that. And around this approved part of your knowledge graph, the PoolParty server calculates a network of terms which by themselves again have relevancies and co-occurrences. So that's kind of a totally automatically calculated additional layer of semantics on top of the probably rather small but approved part of your knowledge graph. And all that together is then being used for entity extraction and other services. And now, since I've already mentioned shadow concept extraction, that's also something which is implemented totally from scratch with 6.0. Let's take a look maybe on the papers themselves, so you can also explore the content of the papers in that interface if you like. So you see there's around about 400 journal papers have been explored here. And so in that interface, it's really just meant to be used for taxonomy extension. So you see here highlighted all the different concepts from the knowledge graph. Those are the areas. The areas are mainly derived from the structure of the taxonomy. And in addition to the concepts, you also see terms which are not concepts yet, but could be interesting to be added, like subgraphs maybe. You just click here, and then it's added. It has been added to this candidate concept box. And if I click here, I can start to integrate that. So there are no co-occurrences suggested, at least in that. So I go back. And then in addition to that, you now also get those rather gray concepts. And that's what we call shadow concepts. So that's also interesting to see, okay, how is a document related to concepts in the knowledge graph, even if not really mentioned explicitly. So for instance, design, email, evaluation, and so on and so forth is probably not really, or is for sure not mentioned in the text itself, but by finding the relations between the concepts and the terms and the other concepts which are really in the text, we can predict whether it has a relevancy or not. So let me show you this principle just with another interface. So this other interface is this little test form you always get shipped together with the extractor. So here actually, the extractor is really just an API basically to be used to annotate documents in your content management system probably, but there's a little test form just to make some tests around, to find out whether the extractor produces the expected results or not. So in that case, you can pick from the one project you created and also from the calculated corpus. I already did that here. And now I can put in here a text fragment and do a test on top of that. So it's not the end user interface, of course. It's really just to do some tests. So that's a text fragment of yet another journal paper. And if I click now on extract, the service will return usually the found entities as a JSON in JSON format, and here it's just really visualized to be able to read the results. So those are the found entities. So you can see here, it's really not just a label, it's a concept, it has a URI, you see on the bottom left, and therefore it's rather a node in the knowledge graph which has been found than just a literal. So that was in place for the last couple of releases, of course. And now, in addition, we have those shadow concepts. For instance, I think that makes a lot of sense that OWL has been extracted also, even if it's not mentioned in the document. And if you click on this question mark, you also get a quick overview why the system believes that web ontology language should be used for annotating the document. So here are all the related terms and terms which are again related to concepts being found. So it's kind of a network really which is built in the background between found terms and concepts, and by that we can find out whether this makes sense or not. You see, it's not just single word phrases, it's also, of course, phrases which contain several words. So that's the shadow concept extraction. Here's a little explanation. So for instance, this document does not talk about Machu Picchu explicitly, but it talks about a lot of other things which are frequently related to Machu Picchu in the reference corpus. And by that, we predict, okay, this document should be annotated also with Machu Picchu. So that's really the basic idea of this kind of additional option to annotate a document. And in the RESTful API, you will find, of course, that's a parameter you can switch on or switch off. And it's also a great way to find similarities between text fragments in a more precise way. So that's a little example when it comes, for instance, to the description of TV series. Maybe some episodes from a TV series cannot be compared to each other that precisely without a knowledge graph like that in the background. If you have that in the background available, the precision of the content recommender will be much higher than if you just do a simple comparison between the found terms and maybe the distances in a multidimensional room space. Sorry. So then there is another, I think, interesting feature we now introduced with 6.0. We also worked quite a lot on the graph search server. You know, the graph search server is as well as the unified views component part of the semantic integrator. So it's kind of a pre-built application on top of the graph search server API. Also the API again was extended. The API or the graph search server also from a technical perspective can now sit on top of Elastic, Solar, or any of the RDF graph databases I already mentioned before. With the graph database option, you have, of course, also more options to do data analytics later, but the API itself in principle can work with all of those options. And I will show you then also a quick live example, but in general, there are many options now to configure it. There's also, you can see visualizations included. You can configure nicely in the backend. You can determine how the facets are produced, whether it's the ontology you're using in the background or the taxonomy structure. By that, for instance, the concept schemes of this cost taxonomy can be used to determine whether that's a facet or not. and now you can also use the ontology instead of this cost structure. I already showed you the word sense induction functionality. As I've said, that's, for instance, a very interesting algorithm we've been working on for quite a while, and that's a result of one of the research projects we've been participating. Then again, the additional linked data sources I already mentioned. I'll briefly show you maybe an example. Let's say I open a project like cybersecurity. There are a couple of, for instance, also organizations you can find there in this graph. I extracted automatically in that case, by the way, from DBpedia, so there was no need to do anything manually. So let me see which companies can be found here. Cryptography companies, let's say, let's go to FutureX, and I'll go to link data. I already configured perm ID, so that can be done up here. Some of you might know that. So here you just have additionally getty and perm ID. That's in the selected sources. And I just link that now to perm ID, FutureX Incorporation or FutureX Industries. You can also look it up by clicking on the link. So here I'm going to be redirected to Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters in that case provides some basic information about the organization publicly available for free. And if you have a subscription available at hand, you would get even more information around this organization. So you can kind of semi-automatically enrich the list of companies in your taxonomy by data from perm ID in that case. So I guess that's the right one. I can now say exact match or same as or whatever, save and close. And now can also copy some data from there or just leave it in perm ID, and from time to time maybe I will do a sync or a data crawling from the original source, or in that case I really copy the data into a named graph in my triple store. So that's the additional linked data sources feature. And then last but not least, we extended quite a lot different forms of visualization of the graphs, which contain the ontologies and the taxonomies. First, I'd like to show you a little project I've been working on in the area, for instance, of politics. So with politics, that's a taxonomy combined with an ontology. I wanted to describe who is the leader of which city, of which country, how they are affiliated to political parties, and so on and so forth. And if you go to the visualization tab, that's not really new, that has been in place for quite a while. So here, for instance, you see politicians. Now you see already there is a little box now available. In this, on the right-hand side, I could now click on Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, and I'd like to extend my settings here. So which means I can now also see or make it an extension of this cost part of my knowledge model by all the additional properties I've defined in my ontology. So I see, for instance, now that Mrs. Merkel has a relation to the Lutheranism. She's, for instance, member of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany. She has a background in physical chemistry and stuff. So that's quite interesting, I would say. In addition to what we've already visualized, what was related to this cause part, you can now switch on or switch off the other relations in this extended version of our visualizer. And in addition to that, maybe you're also interested to get some better insights into your ontologies you create with PoolParty or import into PoolParty. So in that case, that's my politics ontology. So there is, you also see here now a little statistics. That's also new, like 12 classes, 15 relations, and 4 attributes. Not a big one, still interesting. And up here, you see the links to the different applications you can configure in the Semantic Middleware Configurator. And one of those would be this web vowel option. So if I click here, I will now get instantly a visualization. So you can install web vowel locally if you like. So that's no problem. And that's the visualized format. So you can also reconfigure the visualization. You can set, for instance, you can export it as SVG and so on. So that's quite a nice option now to just add yet another visualization tool to the PoolParty server. You've seen that in the configurator. That's pretty straightforward. And if the third-party tool allows even to achieve or receive a turtle file, for instance, as a parameter, then it just pops up and you see that visualization instantly. Good. So that was the exciting new graph visualization feature. And now I'd like to come to an end. There was a subtitle also in this webinar, which was climbing the semantic ladder. And of course, it's not just about adding a feature and yet another feature to a software like PoolParty. It's really about when features come together, then most probably you have more options to enrich your existing systems and workflows. And I'd like to give you a couple of examples what's meant by that. I mean, that's a good example. If you combine taxonomies with ontologies and custom schemas, then of course, altogether, you have a more expressive knowledge base at hand. If you use that for entity extraction, of course, you will have a very rich set of rules you can set to do entity extraction. That was already in place, just as an example, when I'm talking about the climbing the semantic ladder. What we currently look into a lot is how can XML be orchestrated or combined with semantics. So one of the really important next steps is that those companies which are already working with XML on a very professional level would like to get away from structured content authoring only and move towards semantic content authoring. And we came one or at least one step closer to this goal. And I'd like to show you a concrete example based on Font2XML. So that's just a screenshot, how it looks like, but I'd like to step in here now concretely. So Font2XML is a software created by our partner company based in the Netherlands called Leoness. And Font2XML is a great tool to create XML documents. So you can configure virtually any schema and then make that kind of invisible to the end user. So the user experience is a little bit like a simple editor, but in the background you're creating all those structured content. And now with the PoolParty add-on, it's not just structured, it's semantically enriched structured content. And I will show you what I mean by that. So I create a new template here, or a document based on a template. So in that case, it's based on DITA, the DITA standard. But as I've said, Font.xml could potentially use any other XML standard. Let's say I go for cocktails as an example. There is a concept called DITA map in the DITA standard, and the map is kind of a index of DITA documents, and the DITA document could be a task, a glossary, a learning plan, and so on. So in that case, it's attached to a Google Drive. So I just link that here, and I say, okay, I'm now going to create a cocktail. So that's my new map, which is now created. And as a next step, I can now insert a new topic. So that's how DITA works. And here again, I'm pick a template, in that case, a task. So DITA is frequently used, for instance, for technical documentation. Again, I select the DITA folder in my Google Drive, and I call that Cuba Libre. That's a nice cocktail. Okay. So you see already there is a underline. I will explain in a second what that's good for. So step one maybe is open a Coke can. Next one could be find some ice in the fridge. You see there are always those lines created automatically, and that's exactly where the PoolParty system plugs into the Font.xml workflow. So it detects entities, and then you will see in a second what's that, what that can be used. So let me finish with a search step. I could say, okay, open rum bottle. So one thing you can do now, just by clicking on this underlined stuff, you will see, okay, Coke, actually, what is it? You could replace that and refer to the actual name. So Coke in the knowledge model, in that case, is just a synonym for cola. So that's, for instance, interesting if you want to use PoolParty to make your language more consistent, which makes sense, for instance, in technical documentation. And then you also see cola or Coke, in that case, has several contexts defined in the knowledge graph. It could be an ingredient, or it could be a beverage. Even better visible is that if let me finish with another one, maybe squeeze a lime into the class. So for instance, if I click on lime, what is it, a garnish or is it an ingredient? So I really also, I'm enforced to be very precise with the way of how later my steps can be, for instance, extracted from a search engine. So show me all the steps in my cocktail recipes where lime is used as an ingredient. You couldn't do that without a semantic knowledge graph in the background. So with rum, for instance, I would also be redirected and say, oh, which one would you like? Is it a dark rum or is it white rum? So with Cuba Libre, you should use white rum, actually. And you can even pick one of the brands or even more specific ones here. So in that case, I leave it with white rum and I say, yeah, that's an alcoholic. Or let's say here with ice, I will take that as crushed ice. And if I click here now, I see, there's even an explanation for that. And if I go to the XML, I will see we have now a reference to the actual things inside the XML document. And if you're going to use that later for analytics or for finely grained search, you can imagine that's going to be a much better user experience later if you're looking for a certain point in your technical documentation you're interested in. Well, there are basically two integration scenarios. When we are going to use a taxonomy and a knowledge graph in general to make our digital assets, our contents better available, you can either push back the found connections from your knowledge graph into the original store. That's the simpler version, but with the option 2, I mean, it works and it makes what it should. But if you want to go one step beyond, and that's what I mean by climbing the semantic ladder, it's a good idea to have a linked data store in place, because that opens up really the way you can link your structured and unstructured data. Let me explain you that based on our current SharePoint integration. So this application server here, the power tagging server, is going to analyze any Office 365 and SharePoint document by using the PoolParty extraction service. And it pushes back the found metadata into the SharePoint store, in the term store, or actually in the managed metadata store. That's good because the search benefits from it, but it's just inside this repository. All the semantics stays inside one single repository. But the good news is with this power tagging server in place, you can push the results of the extractor, which is basically encoded in RDF, into a triple store. And if you have in that triple store already maybe some taxonomies available, which then again are linked to other linked data sources, then all of a sudden you can access all your unstructured data in a totally different way you were not able before. And you can make that available either through the PoolParty Graph Search, which is a standard component of the Semantic Integrator, or you can also push that into any other tool like the Flow software or T360 and so on. That's quite a popular one in the pharmaceutical industry, and so on. So that's the power tagging component that does already a lot. And even more sophisticated transformation into RDF can be managed by PoolParty Unified Views. So here we also worked quite a lot in the last couple of months. We will have a major leap forward in 7.0, so we will keep you up to date. That's one of our foci for the next release, but of course Unified Views already is used heavily in several applications. It's good for any kind of transformation and entity linking and schema and ontology mapping. And currently we work also on some big data features in this context. So as a result, you can use your triple store as a basis for data analytics based on graphs. And that would be my last demo, quick demo. I will show you briefly how they could look like. That's also totally reworked in 6.0 graph search. You can now configure several visualizations. They are now boxed in Windows. You can configure them in the back end. Of course, you have those facets you can use for analytics, drill down and say, okay, I'm only interested in that case, documents which are about domain ontologies. And then let me see, maybe I'm logged out. Of course I am. So I have to log in once again, and then the system produces the expected results. So let me show you maybe, okay, all the papers talk about DBpedia. in a certain conference, you see here, for instance, other topics which then co-occur with that already selected ones. That could be an interesting, you can move around those windows, configure other visualizations. You can type in maybe reasoning or something. You will see you get inference engine suggested from the taxonomy. Let me see. Those are resources, for instance, which frequently talk about the documents. And here are the actual documents. And there's also a highly precise similarity search implemented, also something I already mentioned before, which works quite nicely. Well, the hour is over. Let me just recommend to you, if you're interested, to jump into this adventure. There is a demo account available on our website. Very simple, poolparty.biz. You can get your test account 30 days for free. That's the enterprise server. There's also a free first track in our PoolParty Academy. On top of that, there are 2 others. If you're interested in that, just let us know, please. And then if you want to go beyond those first steps, you might be interested in the Semantic Web Starter Kit. That's something we developed in the last 6 months. Also quite nicely, I guess, lots of customers already benefited from it. So we have roughly spoken 15 customers now using this starter kit to learn quickly how they can benefit from semantic web technologies. You see there's a quite little risk. There's no need to buy any software. For that reason, it's really just about knowledge transfer and consultancy we provide to you. And if that's interesting for you, please let us know. So I hope it was interesting to you. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or anything you would like to discuss with me, just stay in the room. I will wait for another 5 minutes or so, or 3 minutes, and then I'm opening up the microphones to you if you're still in the room. Otherwise, I would like to say thank you and goodbye.